Sizing and moving objects in Cinema 4D is very intuitive, and you may have figured it out already as you've been watching these introductory videos on the interface. One thing before we get started here, ensure, and I touched on this earlier, ensure that you're in model mode here. So this model icon should be selected. If you're in one of these other modes, a lot of the stuff you're seeing on the screen is going to look different and it's not going to work. So ensure that model mode is selected before going on. Okay, as I said in a previous video, you can cursor over these axes and you can move the object along the axes, right? Every primitive object has these bright yellow handles on the along the axis. I can grab, click, hold, and drag that bright yellow handle, and it'll, resize along that axis. And it's the same with the other primitive objects available to us. The tools we have touched on already that I want to discuss are the selection tool, move tool, scale tool, and rotate tool. So let's enable the move tool. And to tell you the truth, for a primitive object, the difference between the move tool and the selection tool is minimal. So there's really not much excitement there. Scale tool is a little bit different. When I enable the scale tool, I get these large handles at the end of the axes, and that'll scale the object and keep it in proportion. Since this is a primitive object, it maintains the same proportion when we use the scale tool. Over here is the rotate tool. I'll click that, and you guessed it, you can rotate. Red means it rotates around the x-axis. The green is rotating around the y-axis, etc. Let me Command Z out of here. Now there's shortcuts for all these tools, including the selection tool. First of all, the last tool that I use, if I go up here, the last tool that I use will appear here. So if I hit this drop-down menu, it'll show all the tools I was using earlier today. Okay, so the last tool I use will appear here. This is the tool that's enabled right now. It's got a blue background on it. If I hit the space bar, it'll revert back to the selection tool, which is really handy. So if you want to get to the selection tool quickly, just hit the space bar. Now if I hit the space bar again, it goes back to the previous tool that I used. So for example, let's say I use the scale tool. I scale my object. I want the selection tool, so I hit space bar. Now if I hit the space bar again, what happens? It toggles back. The space bar will toggle between selection and the last tool that I used. There are keyboard shortcuts for these three major tools, which are very useful, so commit them to memory. Let me go to the selection tool just to show how this works. So if I hit the letter E on the keyboard, it goes to the move tool, E. Okay, so what does the letter E have to do with the word move? I have no idea, but that's what they use. The only thing I can think of for a memory helper is E rhymes with move, movie. So maybe that'll help. So E is move. R is rotate. That makes sense. R for rotate. T is for scale. Think of T for transform. So if you know Photoshop, Command T is the transform tool. So T will transform the object. T is for scale. So if you look on the keyboard, the E, R, and T are in a straight line, which is why Cinema 4D set it up that way, I guess. So E is move, R is rotate, T is scale. Now if I hit the space bar, I go to the selection tool. Okay, space bar, selection tool, and then if I hit the space bar again, it toggles between the previous tool that I used. So play around with that. E move, R rotate, T-scale, spacebar is selection tool.